From the 11 Alive studios, this is the Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Well, good morning and welcome in. The 11 Alive Weather Impact Team is monitoring storms and will continue to provide all of the necessary information here and on 11 Alive Plus. But right now, this is the Georgia Vote, and sine die has come and gone. This Sunday morning, we are unpacking 40 days of work under the Gold Dome.
Some hard work for a lot of men and women out there. There is a lot to talk about, especially after the final week of this year's legislative session.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this House stand adjourned, sine die.
On the motion, this House stands adjourned, sine die.
Sine die. This was the reaction in the House Friday night as lawmakers finished up well short of that midnight deadline. The Senate wrapped up even earlier, before 10 p.m., and that raised some eyebrows, including over in the House. Now, some of the major highlights Friday. State lawmakers, they passed a budget of nearly $38 billion, and Governor Brian Kemp signed a religious liberty bill into law. And this morning, we will discuss all of the big news from under the Gold Dome with our roundtable. That is coming up in just a few minutes.
But first, let's hear from those who were at work all those 40 days under the Gold Dome. We begin with Republican State Senator Brandon Beach.
Your first reactions to how this session went?
Well, I thought we had a great session coming out of the Senate. Burt Jones, our lieutenant governor, did a great job leading on tort reform, on some issues of, boys and girls locker rooms and some things like that. We also, wanted to, again, on tort reform, get insurance rates down. He did a great job leading on that issue. Burt's a small businessman himself. He understands the impact that small businesses are going through with insurance rates out of control.
The Senate gavelled out around 9 o'clock or so, while the House was still deliberating and negotiating. Why did the Senate gavel out early this year?
Well, that was Burt Jones's decision, but we felt like we've gotten everything done that we wanted to accomplish, and it was time to go home. And they did strip out one of our bills, the paper ballots, 397, and also they made some changes to the red light camera bill that was not very pleasing to us.
They, the House.
The House. So we decided to gavel out. It's a 2-year session. All these bills are up for next year. So just sit tight and let's see what happens next year.
House Speaker John Burns was quoted by the AJC as saying, and this is a quote here, "The other side can adjourn, but this House is going to attend to the people's business because this is the people's House." Is there a little bit of acrimony between the House and the Senate right now?
I think we've worked well together the last few years, but there was a couple items that got a little contentious, and it was time for us to go home. It's a 2-year process, and we'll see what happens next year.
It is a 2-year process, but for you, this is your last session, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it was. I will tell you, day 40 was bittersweet for me personally. I've been down there 13 years. I love the General Assembly. I love the institution of the state Senate, and I've built a lot of relationships and have a lot of friends down there. So it was tough to leave, but I'm glad to go serve Georgia as the Treasurer of the United States.
Thursday and Friday saw 2 of the worst days for the stock market in recent years following President Trump's latest announcement of tariffs. We saw protests in Atlanta and in other cities across the country. Many people, thousands of people, voicing their opposition to these tariffs. But you're still supportive.
Well, as I just said, it's going to be a little short-term pain. But if you want to avoid a tariff, buy an American-made car. If you want to avoid a tariff, support American-made products. But I will tell you, it'll be short-term pain, but it'll be long-term. It'll be what's best for the country. It'll level the playing field again, and it'll give him a negotiating tool to negotiate to make sure we're bringing manufacturing jobs.
As with all of our newsmaker interviews, you will be able to watch the entire conversation with State Senator Brandon Beach and soon to be U.S. Treasurer Brandon Beach, we should say. That's coming up on 11 Alive Plus. Look for that interview later today. Now, Democrats are in the minority in both the state Senate and the state House, and this comes after an election year, 2024, in which they took some lumps. We talked with State Senator Harold Jones II, the Democrats' leader in the state Senate.
The legislative session of 2025, it is now over. Friday was the last day of the session. You are the minority leader in the state Senate. Your reaction to how this session went?
I think from a minority standpoint, from the Democratic standpoint, we played a lot of defense, quite frankly. Defense as far as voting rights is concerned, defense as far as human rights is concerned, defense as far as trying to protect librarians. So there was a lot of bills in the Senate that we had to really defend Georgians' rights from.
Do you think the Democratic Party was successful in those, how you call them, defense efforts?
I think we were. The success actually lies into the fact that, number one, a couple of those efforts actually still kind of laid on the cutting room floor. When you talk about the DEI bill, that kind of still is on the floor because the House did not get to it.
That was a bill that would have what? It would have banned the use of DEI policies in some public institutions?
Yes, absolutely. It would have banned DEI policies, whether you're talking about within secondary colleges and also your high schools. And so that was one that was kind of left on the cutting room floor. But we did a good fight on that. Tort
reform was another big theme of this session. I see you nodding your head here. Governor Brian Kemp, months ago at the start of the session, he made it clear it was his top priority in his State of the State address. He even threatened to call a special session if it didn't get done. The House passed tort reform by a one-vote margin.
By a one-vote margin. And I think this is one of those votes that will really hurt Georgians, quite frankly. It really does cut off the access to the courthouse. And so this is a big one. This is one that I think will cut off access to the courthouse, especially when you talk about an area of premises liability.
Republicans control in this state the governor's mansion, the state Senate, and the state House. They get to set the agenda. What is the path forward for Georgia Democrats to regain some control of that political agenda setting?
I think a couple of things. Number one, as far as the standpoint of what we actually do on the floor and within the Senate, you saw on Wednesday night where we actually really kind of set the table there on that DEI bill where we presented amendments that actually would have changed that bill. We were prepared to fight that bill all night long. So I think that's one aspect when you talk about on the floor. So we can be more proactive there, which we have been doing. The second aspect of it is that you want to continue to put your message out there. For 2026. That's the key thing.
Do you think Democrats have a fighting shot of retaking either the state House, the state Senate, or the governor's mansion in 2026?
I think, number one, the governor's mansion is within reach. I believe the state House is also within reach, and I believe we can win a couple of seats within the state Senate.
Okay, so we have a whole lot to talk about this morning with our expanded politics roundtable. Today we have Republican strategist Jen Ryan, the founder and CEO of Final Draft Communications. She previously served as Vice Chancellor of Communications for the University System of Georgia and Deputy Chief of Staff of Communications for Governor Nathan Deal. Democratic strategist Fred Hicks, the founder and president of Hicks Evaluation Group, which has worked with hundreds of political campaigns for nearly 20 years. Also an adjunct professor at the University of Mount St. Vincent. And Greg Bluestein, AJC political reporter and author, also a contributor to MSNBC and NBC News. All of you all are returning panelists. Lovely to see you all. Thank you for being back. Greg, I want to start with you. A headline that came out after Sine Die, after that very, very long day. Sine Die surprise. Georgia Senate clocks out early, leaving dozens of bills on the table. Why the surprise?
Yeah, and why is this a big deal, right? Because there's 40 days of lawmaking, so why is the clock out 3 hours or so before midnight a big deal? Well, here's why. Lawmakers are procrastinators. They wait till the very last minute to get some of these big major issues done. And so both chambers were going into Friday expecting to go all the way to midnight and possibly beyond midnight like they've done in past years. So when the Senate adjourned early, it stunned the House and it left a lot of lawmakers upset, but also some very happy that some of these more contentious proposals did not move forward.
And Jen, what's still left on the table?
Well, you'll have an elections bill that will be studied probably over the summer. Look, sports betting is still out there. Hopefully that will come up next year. That was a bipartisan bill that did not make it to crossover. Speed zone or speed cameras in school zones, that's been bubbling for years and really came to a head this year.
Actually passed in the House, but because the Senate had gavelled out early, that was the end of the road for that bill, right?
There was some back and forth, yes. And I think that, that will certainly be an issue next
And Fred, you're chuckling here at the back and forth.
Well, the back and forth for sure. You know, as a Democrat, it's interesting to see Republicans in their infighting. But really, at the end of the day, this really did set the stage for an exciting 2026 where you'll have a potentially lieutenant governor running for governor, and you'll have several new members who are doing other things at that point. So it's going to be an interesting season.
The session closes on Friday. Sine Die just happened. This is the time now where the sort of starting bell really rings for campaign season. You guys are all seasoned political pros. You're nodding your heads here. Greg, you've covered lots of campaigns in this state. What are you watching for as the 2026 season really gears up?
Yeah, and it's already underway. Chris Carr got on the race just days after the November election. The fact that Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones is expected to run for governor is the worst kept secret in Georgia politics right now. And think about it, just the last week, we had Congresswoman Lucy McBath essentially say she's suspending her would-be campaign for governor. And we had former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms signal very strongly that she will run for governor as a Democrat. So we're seeing those moves. We're only going to see them ratchet up as we get closer and closer to 2026.
And it's interesting that you mention former Mayor Lance Bottoms, obviously popular here in Atlanta. She had her time at the White House. But what work needs to be done outside of Atlanta? As we know, Georgia is a big state. A lot of it's red.
Yeah, well, one thing that Mayor Bottoms has to do is reach out beyond Metro Atlanta, right? The black Democrats will dominate the primary for Democratic voters, of course, but she'll have to look to expand her base if she wants to be the nominee, because we know that any Democrat who can win in November of next year has to reach out to some of those swing voters who voted for Donald Trump in the last election.
And that reaching out to potential swing voters outside of the core of Metro Atlanta was a theme we talked about a lot and we heard about a lot through the 2024 campaign. Fred, what do Democrats need to do differently in 2026 to have a more successful result from their perspective?
Well, I think the first thing we want to keep in mind is that Georgia is indeed a true toss-up flip state. If you look at all the general elections over the last 5 years since COVID in 2020, it's basically 50-50, with Republicans getting about 50.3% of the vote and Democrats about 49.7% in terms of people who voted for either party. And so that means that the candidate, the campaign, and the message matter. And so I think for Democrats, we have to look at number one, be focused on winning in November and let that drive the primary, as opposed to some of the other things that we tend to really get kind of focused on. I want this kind of a person or that kind of person. I think for Democrats, it's got to be about winning. And then from that, we need to take the 2024 model and reach out to the rural communities, and as well as grow our vote share here in Metro.
Jen, is that enough to beat Republicans?
Well, I think that you can talk about messaging and changing the conversation from just identity politics to broadening the tent, broadening your outreach, but I don't see a lot of substance there. I still think Democrats are very rudderless. I don't think that they really have an identity right now. They seem to still be drifting in the wind. And you've got Republicans. You've got Republicans that just had an incredible session, despite it adjourning 2 hours early. A budget that funds K-12 education, invests in law enforcement, school security, tort reform, tax cuts. Republicans have a winning record, and I think that that's something the Democrats lack right now.
This is a good point to go to break. We will continue this conversation. There's more to talk about here. We will be right back. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Georgia Vote. Well, this week, Zach and I spoke with both Georgia senators about multiple developments in Washington. I asked Senator Raphael Warnock about the impact of cuts to the Department of Health and Human Services, specifically about those cuts to the Atlanta-based CDC. He had some strong words for HHS Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr.
We have members, colleagues of mine, some of them physicians, who know that Robert F. Kennedy is manifestly unfit and unqualified for this job. And we're seeing that play out every single day. It is deeply consequential for those who are losing their jobs right now. But I worry that it's going to be devastating for our health in the future.
So let's talk about it. Guys, we're hearing a lot of this from Democrats, really flagging the warning signs here. Fred, I want to ask you, during that interview with Senator Warnock, I pressed him about 3 times on what specifics are Democrats doing for Georgia that are kind of in this gray area. They've gotten paid administrative leave, RIF, reduction in force, but they don't know where to go. There was not really an answer. He said he'll continue fighting for them, but are Democrats still trying to figure this out?
You know what? Democrats are trying to figure out how to deal with an administration and a party in the Republican Party that's all about cut, slash, and dash. They're cutting jobs, they're slashing people's personal economy, and in the case of President Trump, after doing that, he's dashing off to play golf in South Florida. And that's a real problem. And I think for Democrats right now, we have the opportunity to let the Republicans be the Republicans while showing Americans, be they Democrats, independents, or Republicans, that what they're doing on that side is not in favor and not in support of their personal economy, which you guys ran on last year. So I'm not really sure what happened between November and January 20th, but that's not what you all are about anymore.
Jen, your response?
Well, what is it, cut, slash, and dash?
Cut, slash,
it used
and
to be
dash.
called waste, fraud, and abuse, and it was a bipartisan issue that we could all rally behind, but now when the rubber hits the road, it's got a cute name, I'll give you that.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Jen, I do want to jump in here because you both have alluded to it. In 2024, one of the biggest campaign issues was the economy for both sides. Now we've seen 2 days of a real stock market plunge as a response to President Trump's announced latest round of tariffs. We are seeing these federal job cuts across the country. Is this a liability for Republicans moving forward, or is this an ad for them?
Well, I think you'd see the jobs report last week was actually far better than most expected. Yes, the market has had a tough couple days, but it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We're in this for the long haul, and no one can really get a good picture long term by looking at a snapshot from the day's stock market.
Well, I think Zach and Jen, I think we can agree that once people sour on you and sour on the economy, that sour taste in their mouth lingers. Because the reality was that in the Biden administration, we had high inflation early on, and people remembered that 2 years later, after inflation had fallen, after their personal economies were doing really quite well. And so for Democrats and for, I think, Americans looking at what happened in the special elections in Wisconsin and in Florida, there's certainly an indication. I think those are harbingers that 2026 is shaping up to be a good year for Democrats, including here.
Early indicators, though, very early indicators. So a lot of road left ahead of us. This is a good time. We want to turn to a little bit of sound bites here. We've got President Trump. This is what he said about the economic impact of these tariffs. And we'll also hear a part of my conversation with Democratic Georgia Senator Jon Ossoff.
Well, I mean, it's to be expected where this is a patient that was very sick. We really inherited a terrible economy, as you know.
It's a question of competence versus recklessness. And whether it's mass firings or trade policy, what we are seeing from this administration is a pattern of recklessness.
All right, so we have heard from Fred, we've heard from Jen on the Democratic and Republican perspectives on this. Greg, I want to bring you in as the neutral arbiter here. Just set the stage. How do all of these dynamics frame up what is going to be a pretty contested campaign season?
And what we've clearly seen from the protest over the weekend of tens of thousands of Georgians, and also just the Democratic approach, is that the Democratic base wants more combative, confrontational politics. You've heard that from Senators Ossoff and Warnock, that it'll be a through line for Senator Ossoff's campaign. A few months ago, he might have been talking more about consensus-driven politics. Now he's talking about taking the fight to Donald Trump. Democrats want more action, and we'll see how that manifests.
And Jen, I know that Senator Ossoff, he's up for re-election. We've got 30 seconds left. I know Republicans are really closely watching that race. Who are you watching to jump in and challenge Jon Ossoff?
It's still early. I know that Georgia is forever the center of the political universe, especially when it comes to federal races. I think it's too soon to tell, but I think that we have a very deep bench, and so I am certain that whoever jumps in will be very well qualified. We'll have a good primary, hash everything out, and we'll have a good.
3 words: follow the money.
And watch Brian Kemp.
But with that, we will take a break. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. One of the more under-the-radar moments in Washington this past week, a Senate hearing featuring former Georgia Senator David Perdue.
That's right. The Republican is President Trump's nominee to be the ambassador to China. Well, Thursday, he faced senators from both parties on the Foreign Relations Committee. One of his promises is to be tough on propaganda.
They do not attack you frontally. This goes back to Sun Tzu and Confucius. Their strategy they will never tell you what they're going to do unless they've decided that you don't have the wherewithal and the will to resist them. We have got to get China out of our power grid, our ports, and our personal lives, Mr. Chairman. And the way they're in there is through propaganda in a major way.
Now, this was mostly a friendly hearing for David Perdue. He's expected to be confirmed without much difficulty. All right, straight ahead, our voice of the voter was born and raised here in the A. His mission to keep Atlanta's culture alive and how politics could play a role. Well, this week, our Voice of the Voter takes us to the heart of Atlanta. Brandon Butler is the founder of Butter ATL, Atlanta's culture channel. And today he's talking community, 404 Day, and how local politicians could have an impact on the culture. So, Brandon, what is Butter ATL?
Butter ATL is a media company that celebrates all things Atlanta. We always say we love to celebrate the people, places, and things that make Atlanta great.
How has that been, having a brand that is giving back to the place where you grew up?
It's been really interesting and really fulfilling. You know, I always kind of tell people, growing up, I would always drive downtown every Sunday and kind of drive down Peachtree Street and say, one day I'm gonna be in these buildings, one day I'm gonna do something amazing for this city. And it's always amazing to me that this thing started as an Instagram channel, but now it's something that brings out people in the thousands all across the city.
If you could give it a definition, what is 404 Day for you?
Yeah, it's just, you know, it's a little personal to me, having grown up out here. Again, I think Atlanta's a place where things are still possible. You know, people see that what happens when you build in public, and there's a lot of collaboration that happens. And so, you know, the traffic gets bad because a lot of people are coming down here, but we're gonna figure that part out.
Are you saying Atlanta's full?
You know, I'm not gonna say we're full yet, but it does feel full some days.
What do you think that our local officials, our elected officials, nationally at the state level and locally, how are they doing right now for you?
I think they're doing good. I mean, you know, I know there's a lot of challenges right now. There's a lot of things going on at all levels of government and politics that people are kind of working with. You know, Representative Eric Bell, one of our state representatives who we're working with at the Capitol this weekend, same thing. You know, he's from Clayton County, and now he's an elected official. I mean, he's not even 30 years old yet. And so you have people like him and just people like Mayor Dickens and a lot of other folks that are doing the work, but they come from the culture. And so now when they get in those rooms, they get behind closed doors, they can advocate for people that look like them, that understand the same kind of challenges.
Brandon, what would you say you're most concerned about right now?
I mean, the growth is probably the biggest thing. You know, when you think about the World Cup coming here, I think we're a host city. I think we have 8 games coming up in just a couple of years. Every game is essentially the size of a Super Bowl. And so when you really think about that, it's 8 Super Bowls that are getting ready to happen in Atlanta, and we need public transportation. But even more important than that, we need a place to send all these people.
Let's say you got that job. You are the curator of this Bourbon Street of Atlanta, which will be better because it's in Atlanta, obviously.
Absolutely.
What does that vision look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I think it's obviously a mixed-use space, so we need places that are accessible, we need places that are quick and easy to get to, and more importantly, we need places that are safe late at night.
Brandon, what are you most optimistic about?
And I'm probably most optimistic about is just knowing that we have people and leaders in place that kind of understand what's important, and they go back and they kind of connect. I'm also optimistic with the type of leadership that's out here and the type of businesses that are out here. They still find ways to connect to the culture.
A great conversation with Brandon there. And I know that during your interview, he also talked about the impact of rural Georgia on Metro Atlanta and the rest of the state.
That's right. And even the opposite of that, right? He's basically saying while politicians focus on Atlanta, they need to make sure that resources are going to rural parts of Georgia as well so they don't slip through the cracks.
Georgia always at the center of things. We thank you all so much for being with us today and hope to see you next week for another edition of The Georgia Vote.